Hi everyone. This is just a quick mini lecture on Impressionism. This was covered in class, but also is covered by your textbook. We're also going to take a look at some brief examples of the different styles that Impressionists tended to use, kind of the axioms of Impressionism, if you will. So we have to kind of set the stage here. In the 1600s, with the scientific revolution, we saw the advent of these various royal academies spring up all across Europe. And that wasn't just for science, that was also for the arts. And so the one in France that is known as the Salon is kind of the go to in terms of ratings of pieces of art, for lack of a better term. Each year they'd put on a grand exhibition with kind of the quote unquote best pieces of artwork from France throughout the course of that year. Now, these judges are going to be judging the things on their own. So, what we tend to see with any large movements is the authorities are slow to change. And so when you see these different changes throughout artistic periods, it usually takes about 10 to 15 years for those changes to be recognized as um, having quality or being pushed through by these academies and by the salon specifically. So people were rejected, and so you had to wait basically an entire year to submit another work before the academy, other work before the academy. Um, these rejects, a couple of them, form their own kind of mini club. The name is in French there. I could have somebody in French repeat it, but suffice it to say that it's an anonymous cooperative group of artists, painters, sculptors, and engravers. And this group is made up, it's not a very large group, but they don't necessarily want their names attached to the name of the group. They're going to put on their own exhibitions of this quote unquote rejected artwork. The exhibitions start in 1874, and it's made up, at least initially, of predominant Impressionists during this time period. Initially, Impressionism is a pejorative phrase. It's used derogatorily to describe specifically the painting you see up in there in the upper right-hand corner, which we'll hit later on, by Claude Monet, Impressionism Sunrise. And it's the idea that these paintings don't appear to be finished in the classical sense, and we'll see what that means. So the Impressionism's kind of main axioms, or stylistically what we tend to see with Impressionist pieces of art, short, quick brushstrokes, but those brushstrokes, they would tend to go back over them. And by using oil paint, they actually create a texture to their works that gives it, in some cases, they can make it form like a three-dimensional type of look. Avoiding black, but specifically avoiding black in terms of the contrast between black and white. The black would be formed by the swirls of other colors coming together, not by creating just here is black paint, here is blue paint, here is white. And so the colors that are formed you're going to see kind of a swirly pattern to these different paintings. These vivid colors are not going to necessarily mix together, however, and so you're going to see a contrast between colors, and that's going to give each color a sharpness to it. You're going to see vivid colors as a result of the separation. Your red isn't going to leak into the blue of a dress or something like that. We see the use of natural light. A lot of these painters are going to paint outdoors, and so they're going to be using natural light both in terms of how they're painting, but also in terms of what their subjects look like. And it's not going to be just one standard, here's where the light's coming from. They play with light, they play with natural light, and they look at how that natural light is going to affect or impact the subjects of their work. They're known for breaking rules in a couple of different ways. Number one, breaking rules in terms of form. It's a snapshot in time, but it's not a snapshot for accuracy. In some cases, this is looked at as a rebelling against the advent of cameras, which photographs are starting to be formed. George Eastman is the mid to late 1800s, the founder of Kodak. We see the first kind of photographs of the Civil War in America in the mid 1800s coming out. And so you can capture accuracy with photographs. And so these painters are then looking at it as, okay, why am I going to redo what can already be done? And so in some cases, it's rebelling against that by showing here's my individual perspective on this particular snapshot. They favored color over lines. So in showing detail, it's not about the form of the lines, it's about the way that the colors are used to express the subjects themselves. Also, breaking rules of narrative and focus. Typically, we've seen this throughout art where you're focused on one particular aspect or one particular part of a painting, but the Impressionists will kind of play with that, have multiple perspectives, multiple narratives, multiple subjects at one time, and it's up to the viewer to try and make sense of those narratives. The people who do Khan Academy videos that we've seen a bunch of times, Dr. Beth Harris and Dr. Steven Zucker, there was a quote in one of the videos on Impressionism that I really liked, the idea that they would be capturing a fleeting moment. And I say sort of in this case because, again, that fleeting moment is up to the observer what they want that moment to mean. It's not necessarily that snapshot for accuracy's sake, it's a snapshot of an individual's perspective, someone's impression about a particular scene or topic. These are your heavy hitters in terms of Impressionists, and I just have this as kind of a list. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. Edward Manet is looked at as kind of the patron saint of the Impressionists, um, but he is fully recognized by the Salon, by the Royal Academy during this time period, and so he actually never exhibits with the rest of the Impressionists. His works do get exhibited in the Salon on a semi-yearly basis, and so he never actually participates with them. But stylistically, the Impressionists look to him as kind of their basis or foundation. Edgar Degas, he's the dancer guy, and I hate boiling down these artists to one particular thing or pigeonholing them in some way. But this is, again, just a brief overview. This is not an AP art history course where you're really going to delve in. But typically, ballet, you see these dancers, that's Degas. Mary Cassatt, we have an American in there. And Cassatt and Degas form this kind of interesting friendship over the course of 40 years. They become really, really strong friends. They admire each other's works. Stylistically, they're similar. And that friendship forms kind of right at the beginning of the Impressionist movement. Claude Monet is probably like the Babe Ruth of, or Hank Aaron of this time period. Um, Monet's water lilies are going to be kind of the traditional examples of Impressionism. Bertha Morisot, she is another woman, and she's part of this kind of triumvirate of women who um, show that now, as women are starting to gain more and more social standing within society, they're able to drive some of these movements, at least in the art world, forward. We're not going to necessarily see it in politics just yet to a strong degree. um, Exceptions would be like the Seneca Falls Conference in America. But these women are able to advance things forward and be on the cutting edge, be the avant-garde artists. Pierre Auguste Renoir, sometimes he kind of flits in and out of Impressionism in terms of his style. And then I threw Paul Cézanne in here. He starts out kind of young and admiring the Impressionists and showing with them, but he is eventually going to be much greater associated with um, the post-impressionist movement, and I just wanted to kind of draw a comparison between the two. He's the fruit guy, and in fact, in some cases, it would take him so long to do his paintings of fruit that the fruit would rot, so he actually used wax fruit for the majority of his models. So here we have some examples on the left. You see Degas in the dance class, or I guess it's my left, I don't know if it's yours. The dance class, 1874, and if you can look pretty closely at this, you see the way that he tries to play with narrative and the way that he tries to break with tradition. Traditionally, when we see dancers, we see ballet, there is grace, there is beauty, there is sophisticated movement, but we really don't get that in this one. You have the old dance master here kind of hanging out in the middle. But the girls that you see, like this one here, she's chewing on her hand a little bit. In the background, these dancers are all waiting to go with kind of their mothers in the background. And you see one person dancing, but she's not really that good. And I know it seems a little wrong to say the subject of an artwork is not a good dancer, but we don't see that grace and beauty that you would think of traditionally from this. And we also don't see an individual narrative. You have a lot going on in this painting. This young lady here has finished and she is already losing interest in what is going on, already thinking about what comes next. And so you have these different narratives taking hold in there. The visit to the museum in 1879, this is a really good example of showing color over line. We don't really see exact lines, and for that reason, you see, at least early on, the discussion of Impressionist paintings as being quote unquote unfinished. because those lines aren't distinct. We have these swirling colors. It's the colors that are used to separate different areas. It's not the lines that are there. And so, especially as you look at this dress, it just kind of flows off and becomes really, really fuzzy at the bottom. And that idea is something that traditional art would not have really looked at. Here we have one by Mary Cassatt in the Loge. This is a balcony in an opera house, and operas were places to see but also be seen. It's not just about the artwork, it's about the societal function of the opera house as well. You see this woman, she is looking very severe, she's looking very intently. But as that's happening, there's actually a gentleman over here who appears to be looking at her. Um, and so you have this element of multiple narratives taking place, and it not just being, okay, they're at an opera house and we're seeing this woman view the opera. Maybe she's viewing somebody else in another reach of the balcony. And so those narratives tend to be something that these impressionists will play with quite often. This is kind of the first of the Impressionist paintings, Impressionism Sunrise, 1872 by Claude Monet. And you get this sense of how people looking at this and not really understanding, we look at this and say, this is a modernist piece. But people during that time period could have easily looked at this and seen, well, it doesn't look finished. Where's the vanishing point? Where's the horizon actually at? We see the reflection of the sun, but it's kind of haphazard. We see this boat down here, and again, it doesn't really show those distinct and clear lines. Here's another Monet example. These are water lilies. He has multiple examples of these. This is from much, much later in his life. But again, there's no vanishing point. Are we standing in the water? Are we standing on a ledge? We don't know exactly where this perspective is, and it just kind of ends. There's no horizon in the background. We don't see where the water meets the sky. And that's something that traditionalists would look at and say, that's not quite right. And so that's why these impressionists kind of get that label. But you can see kind of that three-dimensional quality, but there's not a distinctness to that quality. You can't, yes, you can see through the water, but you can't really tell, okay, like, how deep is this? How do these water lilies exist on top of the water? Then we have a Renoir. This is kind of an outdoor dance hall, but check out the way that the natural light is played with. As the light comes through the trees, we see various shadows, and the light doesn't appear to be just coming from, while it comes from one direction, it's not just playing with one particular part of the painting. It's kind of all over the place. We see flirtation, which is something traditionalists would have definitely not looked at, especially considering these people aren't necessarily all married. They're all young. They're having fun. They're interacting. They appear to know each other. And so those narratives that are being told, we're seeing the differences in how society is existing in the late 1800s as well. Finally, this is a post-impressionist piece. This is Paul Cézanne. And as you look at this, you can kind of tell, okay, this is starting to move away from traditional art. This is becoming more and more abstract. Look at the way that this angle, is this the floor where there's a piece of fruit here? I would say probably. But the way that that floor is shaped, it's almost curved or angled, like that fruit shouldn't be sitting there. He's playing with the laws of gravity at that point. But it's the way that Cézanne shows the angles of the different areas of the painting that is causing that view to kind of mess with gravity. If you take a look at the Cupid, even the Cupid in the center is not perfect. While we have these traditional statuesque lines, he appears elongated. He appears kind of misshapen and angled in different directions, even though we have kind of the classical contrapposto pose. The fruit that's on the table is kind of all over the place. Why is it not on the plate? The folds in the cloth over here on the side are not traditional. They don't give us an exact, okay, here's exactly how this particular cloth would lay. And so these are the types of things that we're going to start to see in post-impressionism, where we move away from the concrete, we move away from depicting accuracy and into abstract thoughts and abstract paintings and works. And that really starts with the Impressionist movement itself. Thanks a lot and have a great day.